there's a misconception that AI is largely going to replace tools as well as people. But I'd say with Kenyan law, it's such a fundamental example where it's not really at a point where it's replacing Kenyan law, because that really is your single source of truth as to what is the current state of this legal issue in Kenya.
Welcome to the African Stack, where we are having conversations with people shaping Africa's digital future. Welcome to our audience and welcome to Michael, who is our guest for today. Michael works in legal technology, and we just thought it would be very good for us to sort of hear what that field looks like, especially in the African space and the Kenyan space. So, Michael, thank you for joining us today. Why don't we start by you telling us about what you do? What's your title? What do you do on a day-to-day basis?
First, thanks for having me. I work as a legal operations analyst at ALN Kenya and Joala and Kana. And essentially what that entails is focusing on the people, processes, and technology behind the service delivery which we offer to our clients.
When you say people, processes, and technology, how do those three things coincide?
Well, in essence, first of all, with the people, we work to serve our lawyers. We work to make sure that we're equipping them with the tech they need that fits into the processes which they'd have in delivering services to our clients. And more often than not, we'd want to make sure that always sits in and focuses on the processes needed, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah. So how is that different from like the traditional way of practicing in the legal field?
So I'd say the traditional focus is really the relationship between the client and the lawyer. The lawyer is always going to be the one supporting the clients in delivering them with the needs they'd have. If they have certain issues they'd have, if they want support in transactions, disputes resolved, then the lawyer would be the one who'd be focusing on solving that problem. What we do in legal operations is essentially supporting the lawyers with what they'd need, understanding their processes in terms of what does it take to deliver a given service, how can we equip them as people with the necessary technology they'd need to maybe improve the quality of the service they're delivering, in certain instances improving the speed with which they're able to deliver it. And certain times it may even be, we'll call it softer such stuff, being able to enable clearer communications between themselves and the clients, whether it's real-time reporting on larger matters, things of that nature.
So what kind of technology do you need to build for them to be able to do all of these things?
Well, so it's a mix. So there's technology that we'd build internally, but also, of course, tech that we'd outsource. So say, for example, on the project management side, across different facets of legal practice, you'll find that there's always a gap, say, for example, within a due diligence, where you're going to be looking through a huge bulk of documents that are going to be sorted across different kinds of spaces. Say, for example, how you're sorting through insurance-specific type of risks, your real estate type of issues, financial arrangements. Now, as that's going to be a really long and lengthy process, there's always going to be the client's pressure on how far along you are with it, just as an example. So what you're able to do with technology is kind of just create a platform through which you'd be able to have a degree of visibility if they'd want to see in real time, how far along are we with this? What are some of the things that I'd need to look out for based on the analysis that's been run so far? What actions need to be taken? What information hasn't been provided against what was initially agreed? Stuff which, of course, in the most traditional sense of legal practice would be literally phone call, tracking, checking on your notebook. If maybe you take a few steps forward, maybe you'd have an Excel sheet which has this tracked, but there's still always going to be that difficulty in measuring where we are, especially when you start going into the hundreds, if not thousands of documents.
So we're doing away with the physical ways of like picking up a file and having to look through it and having to call people every day and just putting it into one system.
Well, in part. So not everything is going to be done away with in its entirety, but there are certain bits and pieces which are. So say, for example, and I think that's where it really touches on the people. At the end of the day, it's not just a service that you're delivering. It's not just a transaction that's being run. It's a real client whose problem you're going to have to be solving. And it's very often something which they care about. So you'll need to have the softer touch. You'll need to be speaking with them quite frequently. So the phone calls are still going to be taking place, of course. You're still going to have to communicate and keep a good relationship with said clients. But the pains in the administration is really some of the opportunity where technology can kind of help along.
And you have an LLB.
Yes.
Do you think that has helped you to get into this field? And do you think it's necessary for someone who wants to, let's say, work in legal tech can you just do the engineering side and not do the legal side, or do you have to have both of them?
I'd say one, it has helped me for sure in terms of even just having a baseline of empathy with, I guess, the lawyers who we're serving, in terms of just better understanding some of the legal processes, in terms of understanding some of the pains behind the different tasks they take on. It certainly helps. But I don't think it would be accurate to say it's something that's needed to work in legal tech generally. Because the legal tech space, especially as time and technology develops, as well as the business needs tend to evolve, you'll find that there may well be need for a broader set of skills. It may well even be engineers, of course, for example, with software development background. If you'd want to build software yourself, it's a kind of thing that helps fairly significantly. If you'd have a background in data analysis or data science generally, given how strongly technologies like AI rely on data, having that kind of background certainly helps too. And of course, even just say fundamentals, like if you understand the niche, if you're talking about a legal practice which operates within a certain set of sectors, then in the same breath, not even necessarily just from a legal lens, but having that sector specific background and understanding and empathy could help to then solve for said legal nuance. So I don't think there's necessarily a fundamental requirement to get into the legal tech space in terms of the fixed boundary, but there are evolving roles all around. Yeah.
So clearly a lot of tech is happening in the legal field.
Yeah.
Do you think that legal teams are becoming more like tech teams or like data teams instead of just focusing on the legal, or can the two coincide like very seamlessly?
So I'd say that it's a bit of a natural trajectory if you were to ask me. So it's interesting. Richard Susskind is a renowned legal tech expert, has been for the past 3 to 4 decades. Now, one of his early philosophies was that the future of the law firm will start to look a lot more like a tech outfit than it would the traditional sense of the law firm. Because kind of when you start to strip down some of the fundamental problems we're talking about, say like, for example, within a due diligence, it's really bulky data that you'd need to process, essentially based on your predefined standard as a firm, which I think more and more as we're seeing with what technology is capable of doing, it's able to support that bulk data analysis, provided that it's the right captain at the ship. It still needs that direction. It still needs that fundamental guidance. But so the legal requirements or that legal expertise is still fundamentally needed. But I think more and more as a given firm or outfit decides how it wants to evolve, it certainly makes sense to interrogate how you'd be able to go about delivering said service to your clients and what kind of skills you'd need given the evolution of tech and the business needs generally.
Can a law firm like exist without the technology? Or are we reaching a stage where it's not possible?
Well, it depends.
Okay.
Because I think there's certainly an increasing need because much as it's become so naturalized, there was a bit of pain in process. For example, even integration of fundamental stuff like your MS Office suite using Microsoft Word. You could still run it off pen and paper. You could still have someone that just takes notes as you go about doing certain things. But of course, you'll find that it makes it a bit harder to compete, especially for some of the smaller outfits. I'd say if anything, that really is just going to give you a bit more leverage to compete more with larger law firms. Whatever pieces of leverage you can pull on, I think is only going to be a benefit.
So is it the clients who think it's a benefit, or is it the law firm that thinks it's a benefit?
That's an interesting question.
Because I mean, do the clients know about the technology? Is it something that you disclose?
Of course, because largely in fact, you'd find that with a lot of the clients, it's largely collaborative. Because when we'd open up platforms, either that we've built internally for project management purposes or that we've sourced for different more niche kinds of transactions, you'd want them to get clear visibility so that they can get the real dashboards on what the progress is on certain tasks that they're taking on. If it's, let's say, if you're working within a real estate development, you may have, let's say, a block of 20 or so apartments, in which case you're going to have different leases, or there's going to be certain variations to the leases, and you're going to need to track what's changing at what points, such that you can have various agreements, still maintain that flexibility, but you still just want to be able to get a bit of a feel for how certain things change, how certain items are progressing in terms of the legal and business touch points. So it kind of just makes it easier when you are more transparent, and it's something which I think more and more so helps to make it a bit more of a sticky relationship.
Okay.
Because it's as big a problem for them if they need to know where we are as it is for ourselves just to really keep stock.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want us to touch on security maybe as we go on in the episode. But right now, I wanna ask you about AI.
Okay.
What is it actually doing for lawyers, like specifically for lawyers? Because we have the general AI, we have ChatGPT, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But like, are there, first of all, two questions then. First of all, are there platforms that are African based that are specifically for lawyers? One. And then two, what is the AI doing for lawyers? And
Yeah.
now that can be general AI or specific AIs.
Yeah. So I'd say AI within the legal space is certainly changing a fair bit
Okay.
in terms of how legal services are getting delivered. And I think generally it'll vary from firm to firm. It'll vary based on what your risk appetite is and how it is you're able to manage some of the risks associated with it, security or otherwise, which I guess we'll come to later. But to answer your initial question, it's your fundamentals. If you're going to be thinking about your approach as to how you're going to attach a certain legal principle, because these models are trained on such a vast set of information, and because really depending on the quality of conversation you're willing to have with it, it very well could help you just challenge your own thinking, develop your own thinking, maybe just even organize some of what you're planning on doing a bit better. So certain things like that help. There is, of course, the initial rush to assume that it's going to automate and streamline your research, your drafting, but it's a bit more nuanced, if anything, because the extent to which you'd be drafting with AI is certainly going to be very different to if you're drafting it yourself. And I think it takes a very legally appreciated lens to say that there's when certain wording is slightly different to how you've done it yourself, there's going to be mass implications, let alone if you're offloading the drafting of his entire clause or the entire agreement. Because there's always going to be an element of creativity, even if you just kind of throw your templates at it and tell it to draft from scratch, which of course carries certain risks with it. But I'd say overall, depending on how effectively it's used, is a net positive.
And you, I say you, but like as lawyers, it's mainly about general AI or like the specific AIs that are made for lawyers?
So yes, so sorry to your second part on legal AI, you'd find there's a lot of activity going on even within the Kenyan space, but Africa generally. There's a lot of people developing solutions. Like you'll have actually, I guess not entirely just AI, but you'll have, for example, Jibu Docs. You'd have Jawabu AI. You'd have a couple of different people developing tools internally that are looking to solve for that gap. So essentially, they'll plug in and they'll be able to deploy research agents to certain sources like Kenya law, and they'll essentially just be trained and geared to answer some of our more jurisdiction-specific information. And largely, people are finding quite effective.
What does Kenya law do for you?
For myself? Or
for lawyers. Sorry, for lawyers in general.
Well, essentially, it's just the accessibility to your legal sources, be it case law or statutes. So if you'd want to be able to go back and look through certain points of law, it's just essentially your centralized legal research points. It's your all-in-one. It's where you're able to track where certain sections of a law have been repealed. It's where you're able to check how precedent has evolved. It's kind of just makes certain stuff like that a bit easier. And
AI and Kenya law can coexist?
They can coexist. I'd say that's, there's a misconception that AI is largely going to replace tools as well as people. But I'd say with Kenya law, it's such a fundamental example where it's not really at a point where it's replacing Kenya law, because that really is your single source of truth as to what is the current state of this legal issue in Kenya. But with AI, of course, provided with that information, you'll be able to interrogate some of that information with a greater degree of flexibility and maybe a bit more speed than you would do yourself. So say, for example, if you have a huge set of documents that tie to a certain issue, maybe you just want to do a quick analysis of the extent to which this does or doesn't deviate from a given legal position. It just makes it a bit easier to access information like that. So I think it is complementary.
Okay. Because I don't know, I've always heard lawyers complaining about Kenya law and how it's so hard to do research and you have to keep going back and forth and back and forth. So I'm wondering, what would Kenya law, and this is not an idea for Kenya law, but what would Kenya law need to add to their platform to make it easier for lawyers to not have to do all of that?
Well, for starters, I think in credits to Kenya law, some of the more recent improvements they've made to the platform has made the research process a bit friendlier in terms of just being able to run slightly more granular and advanced queries. But to your point, things like your API or I guess even now MCP compatibilities, which essentially just allows systems to essentially allows systems to speak to each other, would make certain things a lot easier. Because currently, as AI tools currently exist, they're only going to be trained on the wider set of technology or the wider set of data that exists externally. Maybe in a best case scenario, you can deploy an agent and tell it to go into Kenya law. But you'll have to get again a bit more granular and say, go to Kenya law and get me information from the past 3 years or 2 years, or information that's, I guess, it just makes it that much harder. You have to keep tuning it and tuning it and tuning it. But via your API connections to your own tools, via MCP, it just allows you to make a bit more of a direct connection with the two, which can kind of enhance those capabilities a bit more. So would make a difference.
Okay. If Kenya law hears this and you use that idea, you have to pay us. I want to take you back to the conversation on systems and AI as well in terms of your clients.
Yeah.
Is it reliable? Is it safe? And like, is it, closed off such that, it can't keep jumping everywhere and using the information? Or like, are these systems internally made in a way that someone who is in a different company or in a different space cannot access them? How does that whole thing work, especially with clients' data and, your lawyers, like it's private information. So how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say one, AI is only going to be as safe or unsafe as the user who is going to be using it.
Okay.
Similarly, it's only going to be as accurate or inaccurate as the user is going to allow it to be. Now, one, of course, there's a certain baseline of risks that are going to exist. One, especially for a lot of the models that we're using today, your ChatGPTs, your Claudes, these models were trained on jurisdictions that didn't really have the Kenyan clients or Kenyan lawyer in mind. So there's always going to be a bit of a data gap, even saying some of the assumptions that would be baked in, which of course you can maybe do some work around with how you tailor your prompts or skills or whatever it is in the tools that you're using. But it's going to depend on how effectively you're able to ground it on the relevant source materials. So it may require a bit more heavy lifting for users like ourselves to, for example, go onto your Kenya laws, to go onto your journals, to get pieces. And of course, as a lawyer, you're going to have to rely on your internal precedents because your knowledge is still going to be the kind of data that makes the biggest differentiation. Of course, redacted because it's something you're going to have to do internally, even when you store your knowledge anyway. And you're just going to have to make that connection and spend a bit more time on it, which I think in the grand scheme of things is going to, if used correctly, elevates the standard of legal advice you'd be able to provide. Because of course, these models have gotten so intelligent that objectively it's not going to embarrass you, but it may well realize that there's certain things you haven't thought through to the same level. So it can be a good sparring partner to help with that.
It's a bit too intelligent now. But are there rules? Because you use these systems not just like you as a lawyer, but like in a whole entire company, in a firm.
Yeah.
Are there rules within that firm to govern the use of these platforms? Because like, what if I'm a lawyer, and I'm working in the firm, and I want to use AI, can I post my client's documents on it and say, draft for me, whatever it is that lawyers draft, and it just does it? Or can I only give it specific information and then I edit it as the lawyer?
So something we do internally before use of AI, but also just generally, say even with how we handle clients' data. You'll have your repository where you'd keep information, but even before it's stored and tinkered with, you'd need to do a base level of redaction to essentially desensitize the information with which you'd be working, such that if you'd want to make certain queries of a task you're taking on, if you'd want to, again, share this knowledge internally with the rest of your colleagues, it just makes it that much safer. Because as a firm, you'd still have the imperative to grow and develop. And of course, as the law adapts and changes, your internal knowledge has to adapt and change in accordance with the same. So as kind of that process, it's made it easier to build that habit around redaction before using AI, whatever, even if it's just to clean up our knowledge, if it's just to kind of see even how it compares from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, of course, because we work within our network that serves a broader range. So generally, not just for ourselves, but for firms across the board, you'd need to think through those kinds of processes within the context of your broader AI governance strategy. So you need to have your policies in place. You'd need to have the necessary structures, whether it's a committee, whether it's an already existing committee that takes accountability for it, or setting up a committee that kind of adapts and takes ownership of this, and even, let's say, substructures that help to actually take on the action. I think stuff that's essentially something that's needed a bit more.
And the clients have access to these systems, or is it just internally?
No. So the systems are internal.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how do you track? Can a client track their progress? I'm asking this, and I don't
I
use
see.
the lawyer, but yeah.
So it's separate, and I guess to the effect that we'd have legal tech, and I guess AI tools have kind of fallen into that tech stack in terms of the tools that we deploy. But it's separate, for example, to our project management solutions. So say internally, there's third-party solutions which we deploy, but there's also internal solutions, for example, like for due diligence management, which we'd have built internally that helps to serve the lawyers, but is also deployed then to their clients for them to see what the real-time progress would be then. So it's not AI specifically, but there may well be work that's going on in the background that's AI supplemented.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for you, as you're doing all of these things, what does it take to implement the safety protocols in these systems specifically?
So for ourselves, what we've done as AL and Kenyan, we actually were the first and currently only African law firm to have managed to attain a dual certification of ISOs under 27001 and 27701, which is a standard which governs how we're able to manage information security and privacy.
Okay.
Now, part and parcel of said requirements is that you'd maintain the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information to your clients. So to your earlier question, the confidentiality is maintained throughout the entire life cycle of data throughout the firm. The integrity in making sure that there's no tampering with the information that sits, and for the clients, if they need information made available to them, that's essentially the third piece of the triad that we need to make sure at any given time is ready to be produced if and when needed.
Okay, the first.
The first.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And how many systems typically would a firm need to just run everything? Because you've spoken this project management, and there's AI tools, and how many systems do you have?
It would be a number. Of course, you'd have your fundamentals. You'd have your practice management system, which essentially governs how you're able to do things like your billing, your work managements. You'd have, I guess, different firms would kind of deploy a different stack depending on what they need, whether it's your workload allocation to make sure that your lawyers are essentially going to be adequately staffed with work, to make sure experience is being shared across the board, to make sure it can be held within the institution to the greatest extent possible. You'd have your document management system, of course, because especially for law firm needs, you'd find certain solutions may well be needed beyond what just Microsoft would be able to provide you with in terms of its SharePoint, OneDrive type capabilities. But it varies. I'd say it largely comes down to the size of the firm or the needs of the firm.
Okay.
So it's a cocktail of solutions.
Okay.
Yeah.
But whatever you build is safer than like Google Docs.
Yeah. So, and it's not to say that Google Docs isn't safe.
Yeah.
But essentially everything we deploy, we just have to make sure is configured within the standards of best practice that we subscribe to, but is also used within the standards of best practice, because it's one thing to deploy solutions and controls. It's another thing to make sure that they're actively being implemented over time. Yeah.
And is it as easy to implement these things in Kenya, or is it like as it is in, let's say, Europe or something, or are there certain limitations that you face as you're doing that?
Well, I'd say it's not easy generally, because there is, first of all, there's about well over 100 controls that go into it that require you to be aligned with said standards. And it's going to vary from how you manage your technology, your configuration and deployments, how you manage for access controls, how you manage for how you handle your people related risks, organization related risks. So it's not really as touched by being Kenya. So say, for example, because on the data protection side of it, our data protection regime is largely, much like a lot of other African jurisdictions, is largely mirrored off what's GDPR is set as the standard within Europe, which then means that some of the controls and requirements are largely going to be the same. But the pain in actually taking it on isn't really Kenya or Africa specific for us. I think it's something which we've certainly got a good enough foundation to really meet those standards. But I think it's a socialization. I think the more and more the clients, and I say Africa continues to develop, the more other organizations are going to have to be able to meet these standards, not just legal, but anyone who's handling any kind of sensitive and or confidential information.
But what I'm hearing is that you're using outside to influence how you put these systems here, like outside information, outside protocols, outside standards.
Oh, essentially, so yes. So what with ISO, it essentially has, I think, about 14,000 or so different standards of best practice. So across different spaces, whether it's on service delivery, information security and privacy in this case, as well as even AI and how you manage it securely. So for example, it'll have your set of requirements, like you'd need to have auditable access controls. You'd need to be able to have auditable management of your privacy. You'd need to be able to give evidence as to how your client's database is secured and only managed by those and who need access to it. So it's a set of fundamental requirements, some more technical than others, but some which aren't necessarily complex, but just difficult to implement in practice. So you're going to have to ground it in your own context of your organization, then determining which controls apply and which ones wouldn't, provided you can justify. After which, yeah, that's the extent to which you'd ground it in your own, I guess, African context or organization specific context, I guess.
Okay. So there's no like African specific context that we have at this point in time, or is it in development or?
No, at least no, largely no, because it is shapeable, it is moldable. I think, which is one thing which works quite effectively with the ISO standards. So depending on the context of your jurisdiction, the context of the sector in which you're working, the context of the problems you're solving for, it then comes down to if you'd have a certification body, which of course there's quite a few even deployed within Kenya, they'd be the ones who'd come in and just do the auditing and assessments.
Yeah. Do you think we need one that's more applied to Africa, or are we okay with the one that they have already?
I'd say that's an interesting question.
Okay.
I wouldn't say that we'd need a different set of standards. I'd say maybe there's just going to have to be a bit more flexibility with which we'd apply, I guess maybe not even necessarily just specific to security, but just how we apply technology. Because say with grouping Africa into one, there's different markets to different spaces and different needs. Even say like the digitizations of their legal system is quite different. For some, whilst we'd have a document management system deployed, whilst we'd have Kenyan law, for a lot of countries, that's still not really their reality. You'd find that there's still a lot more physical documents management in it. So how they'd handle security would be a very different landscape to how we would. So maybe there would be a need because these standards are very much catered to a digitized reality. So maybe there would be some variance, but yeah, I think I'd need to give that more thought.
Okay. You can let us know in another episode.
Yeah.
But there's an evaluation framework that you contributed to, if I'm not wrong.
You guys do your research.
Of course. Tell us a bit about that before I ask you the question that I want to ask you. What was in it?
So essentially, the legal benchmarks was formally established in January of this year. And so what they've set out to do is to really just gather legal professionals from all over the globe, even increasingly so, and within Africa, there's also been a lot of uptake towards it. And of course, the reality of what the vendor onboarding or vendor selection process looks like is quite different, because you're always going to have your own internal needs. Is this solution really solving for my specific problems that I'd have internally? Essentially, this framework just sets out to empower the user or empower the lawyer or legal team to assess whether a given vendor meets their needs. Because I'd say there's certainly comfortably well over 100 different legal AI solutions currently in the market, which means that there's a lot of them that are doing certain things very similarly, may even be solving for the exact same kind of problem, but maybe the data on which it's trained is very different. maybe the tools on top of which they built the AI caters to your nature of problems a bit better than others. So it kind of just gives you a bit of a questionnaire to kind of evaluate and score your vendors. And whilst still largely, maybe even it's metricizes it a bit more, but kind of gives you a bit of a better feel for the nature of questions you'd need to ask. Because there's new vendors every day. There's a new landscape every day. But I think it's important to ground yourself in understanding what are my needs before we get into whether these solutions are really able to meet them.
So I'm looking for a vendor, let's say.
Yeah.
What are the top 3 things that you would say I need to look for in that vendor before I decide on someone?
I'd say first, everything needs to tie back to your people, processes, and tech.
Okay.
So one even doesn't necessarily have to be legal specific, but what's the problem you're looking to solve? Is there an element of your business that's eating into your margins a bit more than you would like it to? Is there a certain pain or repetitiveness behind which you're taking on a certain task? Is there a certain niche or nuance or certain kinds of data that you need to be able to provide it access to? That would kind of just be a start, even let's say just at the process level. Second level of questioning would be, to what extent does this have an impact on the people with whom I'm working? Would there be a need for us to source people that previously we wouldn't have considered sourcing by nature of what this solution enables us as a business to achieve, which would be the best case scenario? Is there a need for us to maybe rethink how it is that this person takes on their task? Is this person's task changing fundamentally, which would warrant reskilling? So some of that stuff may well be certain pain points that you may say, maybe this solution is a bit too complex for our needs, or maybe doesn't quite fit into what we're looking for. So kind of just gives you the framework to say, okay, this is an impressive solution. This might be a very shiny bolt, but doesn't really solve for my personal problems as a person and or business owner.
So what would you say are some of the things that people most often overlook or like don't think about deeply enough when they're looking for these vendors? And also with that, as the vendor, have you noticed that there's something that they do not do that they absolutely should be doing?
Okay. So the first thing is whether you're finding yourself in a situation where you're extremely competent at using a specific tool. Because one thing that's changing a lot within the AI landscape, even just not just legal, is these AI companies aren't always going to be making super profitable margins because the cost of compute is extremely expensive. So you may well find that 1 year, 2 year, 3 years into your agreement, there'd be a fundamental pricing change to how it is that your agreements would be running. So what that then means is you may well have to take a step back at the end of these 3 years and take stock and say, okay, are we as a firm or as a team really good at using AI generally, or are we at a point where we're just really good at using this tool? So say fundamentally, if you've looked at your processes and said, okay, we've managed to automate X, Y, and Z. To what extent could we replicate this with other tools? How does this other tool handle for information security and privacy as it pertains to our needs? Do they have some of the necessary certifications? Would they be willing to have enough transparency to let us audit said processes that they claim to have in place? So I'd say that kind of helps manage for the fit in terms of, are we really ready to onboard are we ready to leverage AI on a bit of a broader level, which I think we tend to find ourselves grounded in the tool, the new Claude, the new Gemini updates, Kimi K3. But it's a bit less easy an answer to arrive at, but a necessary one is, how equipped are we to actually just leverage AI generally?
Okay.
Now, on the vendor side, your question was,
what do vendors overlook?
What do vendors overlook?
Yeah, what should they have that they sometimes miss?
I'd say it's probably along the same lines.
Okay.
Because I'd say a lot of vendors are stuck on selling you the tool, less so on helping you solve the problem. Because they may well have tools that fit in really well, but you're putting it in the hands of someone that's never used it before and kind of just giving them a salute and saying all the best.
Okay.
Let me know if you need anything.
Yeah.
But that sort of more consultant-esque approach to it, helping you guide through, this is what the tool can do effectively, this is where some of the shortcomings of our solution are. Of course, that's something that vendors are going to be a lot less transparent about.
Yeah.
And then maybe it's like, okay, this is what you can and can't rely on. And I think maybe as you start to realize that for yourself, especially on that where the shortcomings lie, is when you start to really interrogate the dream of AI against what the reality is. And the reality is still going to be there's a lot of value to get, just maybe not the nature of value that would have initially been envisaged.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just finally, these vendors, should they train the lawyers, or do you train the lawyers to use these systems? What does that training process kind of look like?
I'd say it's a bit of both.
Okay.
Of course, if you're going to be paying for a solution and these solutions are becoming increasingly more complex in terms of what the tech is able to do and what that means for how your processes work, there is, and I think quite honestly, there are vendors that are taking good steps towards making sure that you're at least getting off the ground effectively. If there's going to be developments of the tool, they're going to walk that journey with you. But I think something, and like you're saying, is a bit more necessary is to take that step back and kind of look at how are we building that capacity internally ourselves? How are we training our team on what it means to use AI responsibly?
Yeah.
How do we manage for the risk of offloading your thinking altogether, which is probably the hugest of the risks, but a much more subtle one to navigate, especially within the knowledge industries like legal practice. And of course, there's the more softer touch things that come about, your context, your prompt engineering generally. It's a bit of both.
Are lawyers actually being trained to use these platforms, and are they using them well, or is there still a gap somewhere?
It depends on the law firm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, of course, we pride ourselves on the efforts we make towards taking the innovative steps. It's something which we've managed to do quite effectively even before the advent of AI within the legal space. Quite effectively, something we're still continuing to do. And I think it's just in keeping ourselves honest and keeping ourselves abreast of these kinds of changes that's kind of enabling us to navigate that a bit responsibly.
Okay, that's really good. And actually, my last question to you will be, what's one thing that you don't think people talk about enough in terms of legal tech?
In terms of legal tech?
Yeah.
I'd say it's in development of your junior's capacity. I'd say it's such a huge question mark, especially with the risk that people take in saying AI is going to eliminate the, what do we call it? The entry level. It's going to eliminate their work. I think one, there needs to be a very deliberate and careful messaging to your juniors to kind of give them that assurance, because at the end of the day, these are really the youngest adults you'd have within it. There's kind of that need, first of all, for the first level assurance, but also the very clear deliberation with which you go about your training model. The use or the skill of using AI on certain tasks, the use of helping them think through this is how you can think about this problem a bit more effectively with AI. This is how you can use it to spar it a bit more effectively. This is how you can look out for some of the risks associated with it, for example, like hallucination. It's how you can look for some of the risks and why we wouldn't want to just offload the entire drafting process. This is how you, as a lawyer, because I think today they're a lot more empowered to go about the engineering process. This is how you can go about crafting AI to do certain things for you a bit easily or more easily. And it's a mix. I mean, of course, as the tech of those staying on the tech and legal operations side, there's that extent to which we make them more aware of what they're doing on the tech side. But as well on the lawyers, it's something which they're increasingly taking more responsibility in having that as a bit more, having that be a bit more part of their general coaching. Yeah.
So should that just be included in education, or should it be something that comes depending on the firm that you end up working at?
Maybe. And I mean, time will tell, because I think anyone who says they know what's going to happen is probably lying.
Okay.
But I think time will tell. But as things go, it depends. If you, as an outfit, are going to be really deliberate about your use of AI and want to be a bit more experimentative with it, then fundamentally that's what you need to be thinking about more, that we don't really have a lot of conversations around that we probably should.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Something to think about, definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michael, for bringing that to us. And thank you for joining us on this episode. It's been a pleasure having you.
It's been a pleasure too.
To our listeners, you've been listening to The African Stack, a podcast powered by DataWise Africa. See you next time.